if you have to give some advice to other educators looking into integrating elements of activism into their teaching methods, what would that be?
Once you get involved with an organization that you can trust, then it makes the work far, far easier. And then the second thing is not to underestimate the amount of work that it takes to run a module like this. You do it because you are passionate about it and you see the value in it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered by Empowered, the podcast where we have unedited conversation with educators from around the globe. I'm your host Anshul Lau. In our podcast, we have conversation with passionate educators to uncover the challenges, celebrate their successes, and inspire with real-life stories from front lines of education. Today, we are joined by Edzia, who works at the University of Dundee as a lecturer in politics. We're thrilled to have her today to share her innovative and insightful work. Edzia, welcome to Unfiltered by Empowered. To start off, could you tell a little bit about yourself, including any of your key research areas, please?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Anshul. So my name is Edzia Carvalho, and as you said, I'm a lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of Dundee. My main areas of research focus a lot on democracy and human rights. And recently, I've been branching out into just transition research and also artificial intelligence, so bringing the human rights angle to these areas. My teaching mainly is focused on human rights, and it comes from my own background when I did my master's and my PhD in human rights research. So that's something that I'm quite passionate about. And when I was studying, I knew so many people who have now gone on to become human rights activists. So I'm trying to bring a little bit of that into my own work.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for introduction. I must give a background to our listeners that Edzia was joined by her student and she presented out at our Empowered webinars. We will post the link of that video in the description if you want to have a watch. And Edzia, just to ask you, what sparked your interest in integrating student activism and in the area of human rights, particularly?
So human rights and student activism are quite integrated already. The interesting thing for me was to integrate them in the university context, because actually a lot of the teaching that's done on human rights is done very much on a theoretical level. It's very philosophy oriented or oriented towards law. And even when it's taught in the social sciences, it's taught in very abstract terms. And when things are applied, they are applied in a passive way where students don't always get a chance to apply what they're learning.
Okay.
So for me, that was the challenge. Is as I was doing my teaching and research over the years, I realized that there's actually very little within the academic space that provides people, particularly students, with hands-on training. A lot of the training that's available is outside the academic space. It's provided by NGOs or by think tanks and so on. And so for me, that was the interest, is what can I do to bring in, let's say, applied human rights, if you can use that term. Yeah, so that's how it all started for me.
Well, that's interesting. And can you start by explaining the concept of student activism as a pedagogy? And how do you integrate that formally into your curriculum teaching, or how it is integrated as an institution, particularly?
So I think there's a lot written on human rights, sorry, on student activism as pedagogy. I think Paulo Freire was one of the major, his perspectives is one of the major perspectives of talking about um, changing the power hierarchy within universities, where the person who's delivering the content is not always just the lecturer, so to speak, but actually there's learning happening both from the lecturer, who's designated within a traditional classroom, but also students. So it's like a two-way process of learning and teaching. And part of that is getting students involved in applying their knowledge. So there's lots of different terminologies that have come about, and I know your listeners will probably know a lot about this more than me because I'm new to this area and new to the reflections that come out from this area. But there's practice-based learning, there's experiential learning, active learning, and there's
Yeah.
lots of different ways in which we can embed um, practice and into the curriculum. And I think student activism is just one way of doing that. The challenge for me was, how do I do that with human rights? How do we embed learning where students are human rights activists and not just activists in general? So yeah, for me, so that has been a long process of reflection.
And what inspired the incorporation of this module in the curriculum?
Um, I think I joke quite a lot that I wanted to be a human rights activist, and ended up being an academic. And so this is my way into getting into activism through the back door. Um, but I really want, I am very passionate about human rights, and I did not want to continue running a module where I simply taught students the theory of it or gave them examples of how things were. I wanted them to understand what it was like to be in the field, and to really give them experiences and the ability to reflect on those experiences. Um, and that's kind of where I started and how I've been developing the module that I've put into place.
And just to clarify my own understanding, is this module, I'm understanding this is more interactive, or is this module taught online as well?
It was taught online during COVID,
Yeah.
and the students had to run. So the module um, asks students essentially to design and run a campaign, a human rights campaign. And I provide them the training to do that. And in parallel, they learn about the academic literature that's connected to activism, and to human rights activism in particular. But yes, during COVID, they did run, during the lockdowns for about 2 or 3 years, the cohorts ran online campaigns.
Oh, so what I think I'm just intrigued to know what impact did it have with the shift to online delivery and effectiveness of the module particularly?
It was very different, for me and for the students, because I mean, there's been a lot of literature now about the impact of COVID on how students learned, on their development of community, on their development of belonging to a program, or or feeling included. And all of those things were things that I think were reflected in the module. I think something that benefited students when they were doing this during COVID was that, because it's such a hands-on module, there is no
Yeah.
space in the module to be a free rider, to be passive, to allow others to take the burden of responsibility. The module is assessed based on individual reflections, and if you don't actively participate in the module, there is nothing for you to reflect on, and so you'll fail the module. So it forces students to participate at least to some extent. But they did find it very, very difficult. Because they did a lot of
Yeah.
their work online, they were even more limited in the resources they had access to. Time was a major issue for all of them.
So what
And
adjustment did you make to maintain or enhance student engagement and campaign effectiveness in an online setting during that time?
yeah, so I think all I did was to just check in on them,
Okay.
more than I would otherwise, um, to ask them if they needed me to be part of their discussions, because otherwise I would just ask them to create these sessions at a convenient time. But in this case, I would check in on them, drop in into their sessions, see how things were going on Teams and so on. There was a lot of troubleshooting that I had to do during COVID, because people were just struggling. They were just
Yeah.
struggling, period. But the pressures of the module and the pressure of learning in that new environment was a lot for students to take in. Yeah.
Absolutely. I hope the student did not do any campaign for the university or against the university in terms of how they were taught online?
No, 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 but it was very difficult. I think
Yeah.
looking back, that particular cohort really did have, or those two cohorts did have a very different experience to the others.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely understand. I just joked around that. And I just wanted to move on and ask you, I think you lightly touched upon it earlier. How does student activism as a pedagogy differ from traditional human rights pedagogy and other educational methods used in higher education?
So actually, that's something that we are still working out. So my former students and I are writing a paper where we are exploring precisely that question. Is we're looking at the three different, let's say, three different categories of pedagogy, so or student activism. So you have purely student activism on the one hand, that's not necessarily connected to any form of formal teaching. And then you have human rights modules that don't have any inbuilt activism. And the module that I run sort of tries to bridge the gap between the two. And what we are trying to work out is what does that mean in what is the value added of doing that, but also what are the challenges of doing that, and how does that then help us understand pedagogy better, the ways in which we teach and the ways in which we learn better. So that's precisely the question that we are trying to reflect on. So I can't answer that yet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But there's a lot written on human rights education in the literature. And that's not necessarily in the university context, because as I mentioned, human rights education is often done by NGOs outside the university context, but it can be applied to the university context. So I'm looking at my notes, and Anya Mir had a really interesting three-part typology of human rights education. And what she said was that human rights pedagogy or human rights education should include knowledge, understanding, and action. And I feel that that's kind of what I'm trying to give the students. Um, Normally, in a human rights module, what you'll have is knowledge and understanding, but the action bit of it is very limited. And so, what I'm trying to do is to bring the opportunities for them to act, and to see to what extent does that then enhance their knowledge and understanding.
In your opinion, what unique benefits does this activist approach bring to the educational experience of students?
I think there's a lot of learning that they do that's outside the set readings or the set lecture or the seminar. So there's a whole range of what we would call employability skills or
Yeah.
transferable skills that they learn that is not part of that fixed curriculum. But it also encourages them, it gives them a stake in the module. So what that does is that it motivates them to go above and beyond the set readings, for example. So for the students who are really engaged on the module, the work that they produce is absolutely incredible because they have that motivation to put in the time and the effort. So for me, it's on both of those areas that I've seen among the students who do engage with the module a really marked change.
And what about those students who are not very actively involved? And how do you identify and nurture the initial spark of interest in activism among those students?
That's very difficult, and it's a very good question. I do get a few students who joined the module because they had no other option, So, so my module is the only module that has spaces on it, and so they have been, in many ways, forced to take the module. And some of them do develop um, a liking for the module, because one
Yeah.
of the things that I do is I constantly emphasize that you don't need to have a career in human rights in order to use the skills and the knowledge that you're developing on the module. So, running campaigns, working to deadlines, group work, all of these things are employability skills, design skills, planning skills. I mean, these are things that you can use in a lot of fields and in a lot of jobs. So, I think getting through to them that there is value in learning this is the
Yeah.
challenge, because once that happens, that's like half the work done, and then they are already sold. but it's getting through to them, and I have struggled with that. A lot of students will just do the bare minimum they need in order to get the
Yeah,
credits, and then focus on other things. But I guess in a way that those are also choices that they are making, and these are adults, so there's only so much that you can do. um,
absolutely.
yeah.
So how do you bridge, because considering your subject area is very practical in nature, so how do you bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge that they gain from the subject and practical activism within your module?
So I do that through reflective analysis. So all the assignments that the students have are reflective analysis assignments. So these are not essays. Basically, what I ask them to do is, for example, using Gibbs reflective cycle, and the section where he talks about analysis. I ask them to bring in the academic literature there in order to analyze. So they make that deliberate connection between what they've learned in, let's say, a seminar and the readings that they have done, and what they have experienced while undertaking the advocacy. So I constantly show them examples and talk to them about what they're doing and the decisions that they take and how that connects to the seminar. So that as the module progresses, they increasingly get used to thinking in that way. But you're right about that's a very deliberate connection that I need to make to them, and through constant repetition, and both through the assignments but also in the seminar and the tutorials. That's where they develop that.
And so what role do the students play in shaping the activist projects, and what kind of projects do they like actively participate in? If you can
It's
give an
all
example.
them. It's
Oh,
basically, with the exception of this year, which is a slightly unique year, but from the time that the module was conceived, I try to give them as much independence as possible in terms of making their decisions. And I see myself as someone who's there to make sure that they don't hurt themselves in a way. So, to give them very broad boundaries within which they can take decisions. So, um, for example, the organization that I work with, Scholars at Risk, they identify about 6 political prisoners. They've done the vetting of these prisoners, so I can be sure that these are genuine political prisoners who have a lot of support in the international community. And then the students choose one of these prisoners to advocate for. They choose what the advocacy is going to be. So, what's it going to focus on? Is it going to focus on the prisoner's release? Is it going to focus on improving their health conditions, their prison conditions, and so on? And then they design the campaign. So, they decide what they're going to do, what events are they going to put up, how are they going to run the events, do they need to do fundraising, all of that. And then they run the events. So, I see my role only in terms of giving them feedback about what is feasible or not, and then facilitating their networks. So if there are people in the Scholars at Risk network who would be able to help them, for example, then I can make that introduction. But yeah,
yeah.
no, the students are absolutely, and that's
So
why I feel that
basically, the students design and run all the campaign by themselves, just under
absolutely,
your guidance.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's brilliant. So
yeah.
can you share how this practical application influences their understanding of human rights, particularly?
It's it's a good question. A lot of the students who are motivated already have a passion for human rights, but they have a very naive understanding of human rights. They have, rose tinted glasses on. And
Yeah,
so a lot of what I see when they run the campaign is partly disillusionment,
yeah,
where they realize how difficult it is, firstly, not only to bring about change, but in order to do something like this as your day job.
yeah,
There are things that they wouldn't have realized. For example, the emotional toll that it takes on someone to be constantly thinking about a particular case, and these are all very severe cases,
yeah,
and working out strategies to try and help. and the feeling of helplessness because you want to make things better, but there's only so much that you can do. So there's a lot of disillusionment that creeps in through, as the campaign sort of progresses. And then that's my job to sort of build them up again and to kind of motivate them and to show them the value of what they're doing and to show them that what they are doing is actually not at all different to what NGOs do in the real world. And to
So what
bring in
feedback
people.
do you
Sorry?
receive from these students particularly? Because they must be having mixed of experience. And so how do you capture their feedback and how do they share, what kind of feedback do you receive from them about this hands-on approach?
Uh, it's mixed. I think
Okay.
because it's so difficult during the campaign, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of um, worry about the assignments because, again, they've never done the assignment before, that kind of an assignment. Um, and there's a lot of hand holding, maybe reassuring that I have to do. But a lot of the students, after they finish the module and they move on to, you know, jobs outside academia, a lot of students come back and tell me how valuable the module was in terms of boosting their confidence, in terms of helping them recognize all the skills that they already have and how those skills are applicable in the world of work. So it's mixed.
Yeah. If you don't mind, can you share a story of a former student or any student who has successfully continued their activist efforts after even graduating?
Yeah, there's a few actually. So one of my earlier students who did the module, he then went on to work for a political party. And then after that, I think currently he's working with a government. So he's kind of like a special
Okay.
advisor to the government that he's a national of. And a while back, I had got in touch with him to ask him if he could write something about the module and his experience. And what he wrote was very much that the skills that he gained on the module are things that he's using in his work. So he found the module absolutely invaluable. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant feedback. And even with the approach that you have taken, and I think it's a very positive acknowledgement. So, what have you learned about your own teaching methods through this process by supporting students, leading their and designing their own campaign, particularly?
I think I started out expecting that students would have a base knowledge of either tools or about a work ethic or um, and I felt like it would be homogenous. And I think over the years what I've realized is that different students have different needs and that I need to meet them where they are and together sort of almost like an analogy sort of walk with them to where I need them to be, but it has to be done on a student by student basis. So that perspective has changed quite a lot in terms of how I see individual students rather than seeing them as a group.
Yeah.
I think over time I've sort of realized that they bring something unique to the table, but they also have unique challenges, and that no single one is the same. They're all different in their own ways. And yeah, so my perspective has very much changed. So I try to, as much as I can within the limits of time and resources, try and meet them where they are and sort of, have exercises to help them recognize their own unique strengths and limitations.
That's a very good approach. And your approach, if even doing collaboration with students, I'm sure must absolutely be helpful too. And I just wanted to ask you, what methods do you use to track the long-term impact of activist pedagogy on your students' lives or career, particularly? Do they have any
Not,
mechanism of reflecting after?
no, not at
Okay,
the moment. It's very difficult to keep in touch with I find it very difficult to keep in touch with the students.
okay,
I know other colleagues are really good at it. But in the past, what I've done in a completely different role is to ask students to reflect on their program, on the program that they graduated from, And some of those students were my human rights students who then, had the opportunity to reflect on how what they learned in the module has helped them over time, and what advice they would give
Okay.
to students who are currently in the program, to students who are currently doing the module. But that's something that I need to improve on, is precisely what you're saying, is to track how students have changed over time and how the module has helped them over time.
Do you have any community of alumni or students who can graduate and become a part of community? It could be independent to university experience. Maybe that would be another alternative to capture the thoughts, and you can see any trends or common outcomes among your alumni.
Yeah. Especially since I've done this for such a long time, I should do something on LinkedIn or something where I create a group of the alumni of this particular module, because even for them it would be an amazing network.
Yep, absolutely. And what I can understand is activism can be emotionally demanding. So, how do you support the mental and emotional well-being of students engaged in activist projects when they are leading the campaigns and even designing it by themselves? Is it incorporated in the module design?
A little bit. So I give them a brief session on vicarious trauma. I make it normal, let's say, to speak about vicarious trauma, because again, in the human rights field, in the past it has always been the view that the trauma that victims go through or survivors go through should be paramount, and anything that human rights activists go through pales in comparison. And I
Yeah.
think that idea has changed now over time. It's changing. And there is a recognition that people who do this work, people who are human rights activists, do imbibe or do kind of take on some of that
Okay.
vicarious trauma. And they need help as well, because unaddressed, that can be very harmful to their mental health. And we have so few people who do this work, so we need to make sure that they are
Yeah.
protected and are given the support. So I give this spiel to my students, and I tell them that uh, and signpost resources.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm open to talk to them. But I think talking about mental health and talking about trauma in a way that's open helps, because it's not
Absolutely.
so much that it's not something that they need to be ashamed of, or that they need to hide behind or not acknowledge.
So, are there any specific resources or support system you find effective for the purpose of supporting students for their mental and emotional well-being?
Um, there's a lot of resources online that have been developed for human rights. So human rights resilience, for example. Um, and it's just the usual resources that a university would provide, the counseling services, the support
Okay.
services, and so on. I
Yeah.
don't have the training
Yeah.
to support students outside being an advisor, let's say.
Yeah.
But signposting these resources
Absolutely.
is,
And
I think, equally important, because
yeah.
they should know that it's absolutely important for them to take advantage of these resources should they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And students should be aware that there are well-being and support services within their education environment too, that are very reachable and everything stays in confidence.
Yeah.
And also wanted to confirm you, the projects that students work on, are they more collaborative in nature or are they individual projects? And if they're collaborative, how do they determine the role that they play in those projects?
They're all collaborative. So
Okay.
they are usually groups of between 5 and 8 students that run a campaign. And again, I've developed my approach to this over time. So in the past, I would let them decide if there is a leader. I would let them decide what the structure of the group is. And I found that that's not reflective of how the world of work functions.
Yeah.
Is, very rarely would you be given a chance to decide who your boss is. So I've changed that over time, and I've sort of instituted a place, a structure where I decide, like I'm the line manager, and I decide who's the leader, who's the team leader.
Okay.
And then I have like a process of application and interviews, and very brief, but it's still something. And then, once the team leader is selected by me, then the team leader has a chat with the group, and then they decide, depending on how they want to take decisions, who gets assigned roles. They have to keep an account of how those roles are performed. So if somebody is slacking, then the team leader needs to address that and work out, okay, how are we going to address the fact that this person is not doing their job?
Yeah.
And part of the training is is that I continually underline that they are professionals, right? They are
Yeah.
human rights defenders because they are doing the job of a human rights defender, and they should be acting as if they are in a professional environment.
So what role does the the team leader plays in these projects? Do they have a lot of influence on other people, or would you suggest all people have similar role, but leader is just one role among
No,
themselves?
no. The team
Okay.
leader has a huge influence and really does set the tone
Okay.
for the group massively. And I've seen some groups where I've chosen the team leader and I made the wrong decision,
Yeah.
and the group just completely fell apart because the needs of the group were different to the
Yeah.
way that the
Well,
team leader functioned.
yeah.
So no, absolutely, it really does matter.
Yeah, I'm sure because when students realize that their marks or the outcome would be impacted with the decision of team leader, then did they nominate a new team leader? How did you approach this situation then?
No, so in that so their marks are not sort of dependent on the team leader, because
Okay.
I obviously mark it, but the campaign definitely depends on the team leader. So the direction that the campaign takes, what they decide to do, how they decide to do it is very much dependent on the team leader. In an extreme situation when the group did fall apart, I became the team leader.
Oh,
And that was the way to ensure that the campaign continued and reached its end.
yeah. And the students
Um,
feel supported too.
yeah, yeah.
And do you even seek any external collaboration or of any like community groups or external organization in your activist pedagogy at all?
Yeah, I mean, the students reach out to as many
No.
organizations as they need to, depending on whatever campaign they are running. So our local MP, Member of Parliament, has been absolutely amazing in supporting the students. Um, the students have reached out to him on multiple occasions, or multiple groups have reached out to him, and he's submitted petitions in Parliament. He submitted questions.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, we had a member of the House of Lords that the students contacted who also submitted a question in the House of Lords. The local stakeholders have been absolutely supportive of the students' work, particularly political stakeholders. And it's been very
Yeah.
heartening to see that.
And even as you have shared the experience, I believe the activist pedagogy can sometimes lead to even controversy. So how do you handle any potential controversies that arise from activist teaching methods in this module?
Yeah, again, a very good question. So, the students get security training very early on in the module, and part of the security training is to help them identify what their own personal risks are. So they may have certain things in their background that may um, increase the risk that they put themselves under by doing the module. And so they have to work out a plan of mitigation. How will they mitigate the risks that they might come under if they're doing the module? So that's a thing that they get right at the beginning. Um, and then once they have chosen the case, then we discuss what are the risks of advocating for the case, particularly in the context in which we're doing it. So, in Dundee, for example, if you were to advocate for a student, for a political prisoner with a particular nationality, would that create additional risks if they were to advocate for that person on campus, because there's a very high proportion of students on campus who also share the same nationality?
Okay.
Right? So would that create risks or would that create opportunities? So we have that discussion when after the students have chosen their case, and then everything that the students decide to do, we have a discussion on the element of risk involved with every aspect of their campaign. So that's a very important part of the designing of the campaign is to follow the human rights principle of do no harm, and that involves not harming
Okay.
the person that you're advocating for, but also not harming yourself.
And with this overall experience, have you encountered any situation where somebody has literally been imprisoned, or have you yourself
No,
faced
no,
any
no,
situation like that?
no, no, not in prison, but the students have
Okay.
been. A couple of groups have been in situations where they have been felt unsafe while they
Okay.
were doing the campaigning. But
Okay.
because we don't usually students don't campaign off campus. They are
Okay.
usually on campus. They,
In a
they don't
safe
have a lot
environment.
of time to do the
Okay.
campaign, so they tend to be quite local.
Because some of these initiatives can really tie it well with their personalities, and it can trigger that. Some people might go and with the campaigns taking place across the country. I just out of curiosity, I asked that.
No, no, we haven't.
Yeah. And so do you have a set protocol that students are not to be partaking actively near the external campaigns and university will not be held responsible for that kind of thing? Do we have
Um,
anything? Disclaimer.
no, because I make sure that every aspect of the campaign goes through me. So if there is
Okay.
any element of the campaign where I think it will be problematic in whatever way, then I have that discussion with the students. So like I said, I try to give them as much independence as possible. So I don't see my role as saying you can do this and you can't do that. I think I see
Okay.
my role as being, okay, you've chosen to do this. These are the issues that I think will come up. These are the challenges, these are the limitations, these are the risks. What should we do about it? Right. So I see my role as that, because
Okay.
if I just tell them don't do it and do it, then what are they learning? So yeah, as much as possible, I try to get them to take the decisions, and I give them information that maybe they have not thought of before.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned in the beginning that your interest is also with artificial intelligence. So have you incorporated AI to support or enhance activism in your teaching?
No, because
Okay.
my interest in artificial intelligence is extremely critical. So I haven't reached the stage where I'm comfortable with using particularly large language models,
Okay.
the big large language models, because of the ethical and the environmental issues that surround the
Absolutely.
development and the use of these models. So yeah, I'm not at that stage yet.
I think we need to arrange another podcast, a separate podcast, to explore more on AI and ethical issues around that. So,
Yeah.
with the rise of other digital tools, so do you incorporate any other digital tools in your teaching practice at all?
Yeah, I mean, the students are very happy to use a whole range of tools that either they are familiar with or that I recommend to them, like so Canva or
Okay.
Padlet, or the usual ones. Many of them have digital skills that are far advanced than anything I could teach them. So they bring that to the table, and then they use those skills to design their campaigns, to design posters, and so on. Yeah, so there is some element of that, but the focus of the module is very much to say, identify what your strengths are and how can you use those strengths to promote human rights, and think about, reflect on the uh, what you're learning in the module in terms of the academic literature, and then what you're doing and how the two connect together.
Okay. So next question I'm asking you, it might be maybe more towards your potential students or prospective students. And so I would want to word is, so how does participating in this type of activist pedagogy or your module impact students in the short term and potentially in their future careers? So in short, why should anybody pick up this module?
Yeah. Yeah, the elevator pitch. Uh, so I think it benefits students because it helps them develop the skills that they already have. It introduces them to new skills. And by doing that, it potentially opens up a whole new range of careers for them. So it doesn't have to be human rights focused. And it introduces them to thinking in a different way, which a lot of students have found very, very helpful. It's very different from an essay, where there's a very specific way of thinking and writing. With reflective analysis, um, it's a skill that could benefit students beyond their careers. Like I had a student, for example, who told me very recently that the way that I taught them how to communicate with each other was something that she uses in her personal life to diminish conflict.
Yeah.
So there's a growth there that happens that students realize in the long term. And in the short term, it's very much about the development of skills, and the building and the introduction of new skills.
So do you have any follow-up data or feedback from alumni who have taken this module? And so how do you capture that? And do you have any data particularly?
Only anecdotal data. So some
Okay,
of the
okay,
data is actually going to be in the form of reflections that some of my alumni and I are writing on, and that will obviously contribute to the paper that we are writing on human rights pedagogy, and
okay,
student activism. But no, I all the data that I have is anecdotal.
okay.
Yeah.
So are there any changes or additions planned for the future based on recent developments in human rights or educational theory?
Um, well, one of the things I do want to include is AI. So I've been really thinking about how to incorporate the the ethics of AI, and the human rights implications of the tools into the study. At the moment, I don't have a clear link into it. Like I don't have a political prisoner who's been imprisoned because they've developed an AI tool or something like that, right?
Okay,
So that would be
yeah.
an obvious link, but at the moment we don't have that. But yeah, the other would be the use of AI for repression and to commit human rights abuses and so on. And we don't have that either, or I haven't come across it. But I've been really mulling about that and thinking about, okay, how do I incorporate some aspects of artificial intelligence and the ethics of it or the human rights implications into the module?
Yeah. I know you already mentioned that your research is ongoing. So if you have to give some advice to other educators looking into integrating elements of activism into their teaching methods, what would that be?
I think the first thing would be to find an organization that you can trust.
Okay,
A lot of my work has been made very easy because the organization that I work with is a reputed NGO that has networks and that has the ability to support me. Um, so that would be the first thing is once you get involved with an organization that you can trust, then it makes the work far, far easier. And then the second thing is not to underestimate the amount of work that it takes to run a module like this. It's not something that can be captured by a workload model, for
yeah.
example, and you do it because you are passionate about it and you see the value in it.
So basically, your passion drives the module forward, and if you're, in case you're thinking on embedding the activist pedagogy, then be passionate about it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Edzia. And before we close, I want to ask you, where can listeners find more about your work or get in touch with you for further discussion?
I'm on LinkedIn, so you can definitely get in touch with me there. I also have a University of Dundee research page, and all my work is available through that.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And we will be sharing your contact details for our listeners so they can get in touch with you for any collaboration or take any insights from your passion as well as experience. And that brings us to a close end to today's episode of Unfiltered by Empowered. A huge thank you to you, Edzia, for joining us and sharing such valuable insights into the area of student activism and sharing up with us the benefits and challenges of learning through and learning for human rights. Thank you to also our listeners for tuning in. We hope this conversation inspires you to think about how you can pedagogically embed student activism at your own institution in your teaching practice. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated on all our latest episodes. Until next time, stay curious and stay empowered. Thank you so much.